I'm sure if you clicked on this video, you may have heard about the Financial Independence Retire Early Community, or FIRE community. Or maybe you're just someone who wants to retire and you want to know how to figure out how much money you need in order to do so. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Tyler Warlow and I make videos on things I wish I knew when I was younger. All these videos center around ways to improve your life through your confidence, capabilities, and overall happiness. In today's video, I figured that I would jump into the 4% rule, which is a general rule that a lot of people in the FIRE community use to know how much money they need before they can actually retire. I've talked about this concept in a lot of my different videos, but I've never really dived into it and shown just how it works and the proof behind the concept. If this sounds interesting to you, let's go ahead and jump into the video. So if you haven't heard about the 4% rule, it's a pretty simple concept. Essentially, you're going to want to make sure that your retirement portfolio can cover your annual expenses. And in order to do that, you want your withdrawal rate to cover those expenses from your retirement portfolio to be about 4% of that portfolio's value. This is considered to be a safe withdrawal rate where you don't really have to worry that much about running out of money. So let's say that your annual expenses add up to $40,000. That means that the value you need to get your retirement accounts to would be $1 million because a withdrawal rate of 4% would equal $40,000. A lot of people call this the 25x rule because if you take your annual expenses and times it by 25, then you'll come out to about the same number. This rule was supported and researched by Bill Bengen. A lot of people doubt the validity of the 4% rule. They think it can't be that simple. There's no way that I only need to save, let's say, $500,000 if I have annual expenses of $20,000. But it's important to note that this was a highly researched and well-supported rule that was created by Bill Bengen. So in this video, we're going to dive into the original article that Bill Bengen wrote in order to support the findings behind the 4% rule. For anyone who's interested in reading the original article, it can be found under the title of Determining Withdrawal Rates Using Historical Data. When most people try to calculate how much money they need for their retirement or when they might be able to retirement, they do this based on historical averages. If they're savvier, they might also take inflation into account. However, the problem with using averages is they don't necessarily account for outliers. For instance, if you had planned your retirement around averages, then you never would have been able to predict or see what would have happened to your portfolio based on the bull market, the Great Depression, or any of the recessions that have happened, and you might not have protected your portfolio accordingly. In this article, Bill tested different withdrawal rates against many years of history, and he noticed that there tended to be a few key points in history that usually resulted in the worst performance from retirement portfolios if someone retired within that time period. He noted that a particularly bad time period for his estimations were in 1973 to 1974, where there was an extremely poor performance on stocks at negative 34% and an incredibly high rate of inflation at 22%. These two things, low returns on stocks and high inflation, are what together would cripple retirement portfolios during that time period. But again, this was if you retired within that year specifically. When Bill was first putting together his modeling, he did this based on a portfolio that was 50% treasury notes and 50% stocks. That's important to note, and we'll come back to it later on. What Bill found was that if you withdrew 3% of your portfolio, adjusted for inflation annually, that you would safely cover 50 years of retirement. Now, he didn't really model past 50 years because most people aren't retired for that long. This meant that someone was successful at retiring even in the worst situations where they had poor returns on stocks and high inflation. So he of course then went ahead and tested other percent withdrawal rates. He found that at a 4% withdrawal rate, that even in the worst case scenario, someone was able to have 35 years of retirement. Where Bill started seeing issues was when people started getting into 5% or 6% withdrawal rate and they started to have some retirement portfolios that only lasted about 20 years, which for a lot of people would not last them the entirety of what they needed for retirement. Again, it's important to keep in mind here that this was all tested with using an asset allocation of the 50% treasury notes and 50% stocks. So under those circumstances, you would consider 4% to still be pretty safe. However, Bill decided to test other asset allocations as well. When Bill moved to an asset allocation of 75% stocks and 25% treasury notes, that's when the 4% rule survived 47 of the 50 different years of retirement that were modeled. So that meant that it was a 94% chance of having a retirement reaching of 50 years. This had the greatest chance of survival, but he also tested doing it with the 100% stock allocation. And while there were overall less instances of a portfolio surviving, it allowed for greater recovery from instances of a depression or high inflation because stocks were able to counteract that as compared to the treasury notes. Now, Bill has been on several different podcasts and has wrote several different articles and books around this concept. And he has noted that in a vast majority of the cases with the 4% rule, not only does your retirement portfolio not get depleted to zero, but many people still end with higher than what they retired at. Now, it's important to note that with having a more aggressive allocation, that does come with a trade-off. So while the stocks are able to recover faster from hard events, they also suffer the most losses in those events. So it's important to stick it out if these events happen during your retirement, maintain your withdrawal rate, and keep at whatever asset allocation that you have. If you're constantly switching your asset allocation, trying to predict the market, or because you're emotional or scared of whatever situation that you find yourself in, that's when you're going to start messing up your portfolio. It's important to remain consistent with your withdrawal rate and your asset allocation. Maintaining this consistency is going to be important whether you see incredible returns early in your retirement or if you see really poor returns. Because if you see really high returns, you might want to start withdrawing more money because you feel like you have more money than you did, raising your withdrawal rate past that 4%. And the problem that you'll run into is that because you've gone past that 4%, you start depleting your retirement much faster than you originally anticipated. For those that retired in the unfortunate situation of either like a depression or high inflation period, they've got to make sure that they maintain a high stock allocation like they originally had, because if they then reel back and go back more into bonds, then their portfolio might not be able to recover to the same extent as it would have if they had maintained their stock allocation. So for most people, it's going to be important to have a stock allocation somewhere of in between the 50% to 75% range, and then whatever's left being done with treasury notes or bonds, in other words. All of this is supported very well in the original article by Bill Bengen, and I highly recommend that y'all give it a read if you haven't. It's going to dive super deep into this, and you're going to be able to get a better understanding as to why this really works. But that's going to bring us to the end of today's video, y'all. I hope that you found the information to be helpful or informative. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to join me along in this self-improvement journey. If you're interested in more videos like this one where I talk about personal finance, be sure to check out this video right here where I talk about what is FIRE. If you're more interested in more of my most recent stuff, be sure to check out this video right here. But until the next time, this is Tyler Warlow, signing off.